And over the last years, we did, I lost count, but maybe 80 Holacracy adoptions in the Netherlands and outside the Netherlands. And some of them were pretty awesome, right? So things worked out very good. They adopted it quite quickly. It was interesting. We had some ups, we had some downs. We usually have downs somewhere in that process because it's kind of difficult. And then others, it just didn't work out. So there was democracy, used the rules more or less, things happened. At the surface, they seemed to happen. Yet some things just remained the same. They did not reach the full potential of democracy. They got stuck somewhere. You know? Like it's the same old, but now because of democracy, you just move on and plunge and get stuff done outside the system or whatever way we know. There was some forces that restrain them from really adopting it to its full potential. We can use them. And just to name some, moving from that explicit or implicit hierarchy to accountability, to roles. Quite different. Or losing a formal structure and suddenly you get into a clear and formal structure. That's quite a tough one to swallow. Or, well, I think Mark also spoke a little bit about that. Not being confused by job title, being attached to your job title, but getting into the differentiation between role and soul, if you want to know. Or even from nothing is allowed unless you get permission to anything is allowed, unless there's a rule that tells you not to. Big differences. So there's a lot of work to do. But let me switch to the force field I want to talk about, the tool we nowadays use a lot when we do implementations. And this force field was developed by Kurt Lewin, somewhere after the Second World War. And he did research in what kept human systems from achieving their goal. Right? And he discovered there were driving forces, things that help them get there, and restraining forces, things that hold them back, get them to their goal. And then he started doing research and discovered that doing more of these driving forces didn't bring them any closer to their goal. And somehow the restraining forces increased in power as well, keeping the equilibrium. Everything remained the same. However, when you work on the restraining forces and reducing or weakening those, it did start moving. So suddenly there was space available for the driving forces to bring them closer to the goal. So he actually found out with empirical research that the weakening or reducing restraining forces is a more effective way to get closer to your goal. So we thought that would be an interesting tool to start researching at multiple clients on what is actually going on there. So we set the goal of how do you get to successfully adopting Holacracy in our organization. Because this whole thing only works when you have a clear goal, right? Because you can have different driving or restraining forces when you have a different goal. So we took a specific goal that mattered to us, how to make adopting Holacracy successful. And then of course, and this is sort of a collection of data that goes from multiple clients, you get from the driving side many of the forces that come with Holacracy, right? So the easy and frequent organizational changes that take place, or the transparency in the roles it actually does work. The focused meetings, people getting empowered to make decisions, etc., etc. These are familiar, that's right. If you do Holacracy, it's sort of driving. And then there's also the restraining forces that seem to be in the pattern. And those are more like, well, this is all the clarity that comes with Holacracy, right? It's quite nice. Then you get on the human messy side that seems to be restraining the adoption. So, feelings of missing the boss that you have, right? Might not be so nice. Or not respecting the authority of the role. So suddenly a colleague can call the shots, but you just fight over it. who recognizes some of these restraining forces? Can you name some? Which ones do you recognize?
Felix is missing a glass.
The missing glass?
Yeah, sometimes. But it's not exactly on there, but it's lack of appreciation.
Lack of appreciation, yeah.
Hiding behind roles.
Hiding behind the roles. Okay. Yeah.
Selfishness.
Selfishness, yeah. They all seem to pop up, and it seems to be kind of a pattern, right? So in multiple organizations, once you start adopting holacracy, they seem to pop up. Some more, some less, some might not show up in your organization. You recognize them. So once we found this out, then we realized we had to weaken or reduce the restraining forces. We worked with the clients closely together, like, okay, which ones are the most easy to weaken? That's a good way to start, right? And you move closer to your goals. Let's start with these ones. So we categorized them and found the ones that we wanted to work with. Might be different with different clients. And then we had to deal with them, of course. Well, then holacracy doesn't really solve it for you, maybe partially, but not all of it. And that's where SCT came. What you do. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for this introduction. We are talking in SCT a lot about the undercurrent. And you could say that's the area or the space where the messy things between us people happen. And you could say that holacracy is really addressing the upper current, everything that's above the waves that we sketched here. And holacracy is a wonderful tool for that upper current. It gives clarity on roles, on purpose, on everything. And it really gives us the structure we need to get things done. However, what as Eric showed in his force view, it's not enough. Very often things get stuck, even with holacracy. Holacracy doesn't have the answer. And we need a different tool then to deal with that. And the abbreviation SCT has been used, it's an abbreviation of System-Centered Training. And basically it is group dynamics. It's it's founded by von Kazarian, who combined the general systems theory with group dynamics and built a very, very interesting theory and a method on that we can use also in organizations. I want to tell a little bit more about how we do this stuff. Now, first we have a lot of question marks here because we would like to know from you guys what happens in the undercurrent in your companies. What do you see happen that you don't like that much? Because what's happening in the undercurrent is very often not very nice. And I will give you a few things to get you going. So there could be jealousy. There could be something we call the authority issue. I don't want you to tell me what to do. Or I don't want to give you an order or request. There could be irritation. What else? What else do you know is in the undercurrent?
I have an example of so high differences in
Yes.
performance between high performer and low performer.
Yes.
After few failures of the low performer, the high performers will use any tool they have to get rid of them.
Yes. So this is very interesting. We call that comes to the dominant relationship. So the high performer gets dominant over the low performer, which the low performer in general would resent. So you get resentment, which is not a very constructive feeling. Other examples of what happens in the undercurrent.
Personality types, matching, mismatching.
Personality.
Personality types like Myers-Briggs, that sort of.
Ah, yeah, okay, but that's, yes. So, differences in personality styles lead to conflicts. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Fear of speaking up.
Fear of
Speaking up.
speaking up. Yes, fear of speaking up. I think with the word fear, we open up a very big area because many of the things that happen in our working life and in our private life are fear-driven. So what we know is that that our thoughts generate a lot of fear. I can give you a few examples of that. We have something we call the mind tree, which is you think that I am talking bullshit. I could think that, being a presenter in this meetup. And when I have that thought, that makes me anxious, makes me fearful, and makes me perform less well. That's one type of thought that could make me anxious. And another type of thought is what we call negative prediction. This will end up in a mess. You recognize the negative prediction? Do you ever make one yourself? Yes. And it's very interesting how negative predictions in the mind trees keep us in our fear bubble. And this is really undercurrent stuff. Happening all the time when you start to notice and be aware of it, you notice that we have tons of mind trees of each other all day. We have tons of negative predictions all day. And they have very big influence on our performance in our work. So maybe it makes sense to do something about it. Okay, so here we talk about, here's some stuff in the undercurrent. So triggers leading to irritation, withdrawal, boredom, repetitive patterns, dominance, just like submission, compliance, sarcasm, vagueness, unreliability, etc., etc. This is the shadow side of corporate life. Even in organizations that are organized on Holacracy principles, you see all of this. Holacracy does not guarantee that this is not there. Do you agree with me on that? Or not? Yeah. Okay, good. So we have common ground here. Yeah. Yes. Just a few words about triggers, because we have in Matt's very interesting presentation, we talked about Jazar. Is that the word now? This bad guy. Shafar.
Yes.
Okay. So we have a tendency to split up the world in the good guys and the bad guys, right? I almost said the bad girls. I didn't mean it. So what we then really forget is that we all have this Jafar in us, right? And it's very easy to project all the shit on one Jafar or on two Jafars and say we are the good guys. And we have a very strong tendency to do that. It's called scapegoating. And it's universal. They do it in Japan, they do it in Siberia, and they do it in the Netherlands. And any country that we've heard in the beginning knows what scapegoating is. And what you basically do as a group, you project everything you don't like in one or two people. And these people start to behave like that. So they reinforce that pattern. And I just say that because in System Center, we know that all this shit, and this is just the beginning of the list is much longer, it always starts with a trigger. So normally I'm in a functional role, I'm in one of my Holacracy roles, and I'm doing what I need to do, and I'm performing well, etc. And something happens that triggers me into what we call an old pattern, an old role, which has nothing to do with my functional role. And then we get into this. So how do we deal with all this in SAP? So Eric already explained to you that we focus on the restraining forces rather than on the driving forces. And we do get sometimes the complaint that we always look for the bad in the company rather than the good, which is true. However, this works. So there's a reason for it to look on the restraining side. And we look on we call it a triangle. So the triangle is developed by Martin Ekberg, a Swedish SCT special working organizations as well. And basically he said, you need to look at role, goal, and context and how they are related. And this is really what Holacracy does. Holacracy is a beautiful framework to organize role, goal, and context. And before I stumbled on Holacracy, working with clients, I need to spend tons of time to get that clear. I think Brian is right, that it starts there. Have your role, goal, and context in order before you can move on. So Holacracy is very good starting. But it's not enough. We saw that. And when you have this little wave, it's in there. So the upper current is role context is in the upper current, everything above the wave. And below the wave, you have two really important tools, or tool sets really, that you can use to deal systematically with that undercurrent. And one is we call communication. It's a very wide concept, but SCT has a very big tool set to deal with communication. So you get, so to speak, a hygiene in the way you communicate together. The other one is this phases of team development. And that's very important when you talk about organizations. What we found out, and there's a lot of research being done about that, is that teams, when they are well, when they are accompanied, develop in systematic phases. And basically these phases are flights, fights, cooperation, and integration. And when you know that, you have a very precise tool to intervene in organization. Because when a group or an organization or a team is in flight, and that means that the differences in the team are being hidden. We don't want to know that we have differences, so we don't talk about it. We keep it in a very formal way, or we communicate in a formal way. You need to undo the restraining forces that belong to flight. And the same goes for the other phases. So this is the compass that you have, and that you can use to get here, to leadership and cooperation. So this is what we do. This is our roadmap, so to speak. Now, first, how do we apply SCT with clients? I think Brian also touched on that. Would you use separate meetings for that, separate space? Yes, we do that. We have team development meetings. We meet like every month with the full team, and we work on exactly these things that we just showed, communication and team development. But what we also do is during tactical meetings, when tensions pop up that are interpersonal, we stop the process, not for half an hour, but for 5 or 10 minutes. And we have very structured ways to deal with the interpersonal tension so that it doesn't get in the way of doing your tactical meeting. So this is the kind of stuff that we do in these team development meetings. We join and build instead of yes but. Yes butting is a very universal phenomenon. And what yes butting does is people close their boundaries. And then you have no communication. We undo speculations, we want reality testing, we weaken noise in the communication. And we learn people to deal with triggers. So that's the way we systematically undo these restraining forces in the undercurrent. And, well, how does that work out with clients? Could you say something?
Yes. So we've been so lucky just like Holacracy 1 said earlier, to be able to experiment in how this works if we start combining. And we have a couple of clients that we've been working with on Holacracy adoption a couple of years ago, and then recently jumping in and adding the team development to the way they work. But we also have experience with 1, 2, I guess, clients that we started together. So completely fusing it into both adopting Holacracy and team development and the practices of SAP together. And so far we had some interesting results, especially with the ones that started with it combined. We actually have faster and smoother adoption of Holacracy because of reducing those restraining forces in a structural way, specific processes. Right? And one other thing that really stands out is if people start to feel more safe, right? They maybe also bring in more and bigger tensions. So instead of all the small stuff, they really bring in the tough stuff, injection, and process it through blockchain. And when it's more safe, right, the psychological safety that was spoken about earlier, it enables people to really take up their membership in the organization and their authority, both within the rules and even outside the rules, or in tribe space, right? Really building the organization. And teams facing reality by checking the mind read or negative predictions that were mentioned, and really get into reality. And it even increases the quality of the conversation going on in a technical route. Okay, it's a negative prediction, but we have data. It really gets more on that level. So there are some pretty interesting results. And there's only a couple of clients we've been experimenting with so far. So I don't know about you people, but I'm really eager to try more, right? To see, does it really work, does it apply in our organizations, what happens if we do this outside the Netherlands? But this is what we have so far.